Hi, my name's Michelle, and in this video, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the OET Writing Task Method. Let's have a look. OET Writing Method. So, the first thing you should do when you receive your case notes on test day is read the task, because you need to know who you're writing to and why. The task will tell you the type of letter you'll need to write, whether it's a referral, a discharge, transfer, or information letter. And it will also tell you who you are writing to. For example, a GP, a dermatologist, a physio, or a parent or teacher. Once you know who you're writing to and why, you should use the rest of the reading time to look at the case notes themselves. Preliminary step: interpreting case notes. You need to interpret the case notes correctly. To begin with, they may seem unclear. You'll notice that they're not in full sentences, but instead there'll be abbreviations and even symbols that represent words. While reading the case notes, it's critical that you interpret them correctly. You'll need to read the subheading as well as the case notes. Plus, it's also important to consider the meaning of any times mentioned. For example, look at this case note. Medical history, hernia 2004. Does this mean that the patient has been suffering from a hernia since 2004, or that the patient had a hernia that was treated in 2004? The answer is probably the latter, because the case note is in the category of medical history. You also need to consider cause and effect. For example, look at this case note. Diagnosis: blood sugar down, headaches and dizziness, dietary changes. So, what caused what here? In OET writing, you need to be careful not to add anything that isn't included in the case notes. And what's more, you also need to be careful about what caused what, as the order of the list doesn't always reflect this. In this example, the most logical conclusion to draw is that dietary changes have led to a decrease in blood sugar, which in turn has caused the headaches. Any other combination just wouldn't make sense. It would be strange to assume that the headaches caused the blood sugar decreases, which led to dietary changes. However, although the assumptions in this case were quite straightforward, please do be careful when making assumptions about cause and effect. So, after you've interpreted the case notes and you think you understand the situation, you can then begin to think about selecting relevant case notes. Step 1. Selecting relevant case notes. Selecting the case notes that are relevant to the task is the first step in writing your OET letter. After all, if you're writing to a dermatologist about a skin condition, you'll select very different case notes than if you were to write to a radiographer about an X-ray for a broken bone. The dermatologist probably doesn't need to know about the bones, just like the radiographer doesn't need to know about the skin conditions, unless otherwise stated. The word count is another reason why you should stick to just the relevant case notes. In the task, you will have a word count of between 180 and 200 words. Leaving out any irrelevant case notes is therefore important. This can be hard to do because you may feel like you need to include everything, but don't fall into this trap. Trying to include everything will not only mean that you'll go over the word count, but you'll also decrease the clarity of your letter. The other thing to keep in mind when selecting case notes is to think about whether the person you're writing to knows the patient or whether you are introducing the patient for the first time. If you're writing to a patient's GP, then you won't need to include any of the medical history. However, if you're writing to someone who doesn't know the patient, then including the medical history will likely be relevant. Remember, selecting relevant case notes depends on the task. You need to be very clear about who you're writing to and why. Step 2. Organizing case notes logically. Once you have interpreted the case notes and selected those relevant to the recipient, you need to think about how you'll organize your letter. One thing you should not forget is that you must prioritize important information. Bring it to the top of the letter and even mention it again at the end. Avoid burying important information in the body of your letter. The recipient of the letter wants to know immediately why you are writing to them. You then need to think about your paragraph construction. Don't mix your paragraphs or just throw in any old case note. Each paragraph needs to have a clear and logical structure, and each sentence you write should flow from one to the next. With that complete, you've now reached the final step: to transform your case notes into grammatically accurate sentences. We'll call this step 3, but really step 2, organizing the case notes, and step 3, transforming case notes, happens simultaneously. In other words, as you write your grammatically accurate sentences, you'll be organizing them into logical paragraphs at the same time. Step 3. Transforming case notes accurately. As we've already learned, the case notes you'll see on test day will not be full sentences. They will be brief, incomplete, and sometimes represented by symbols such as arrows. This is because the OET want to know whether you can transform these case notes into grammatically accurate sentences. Every one of your sentences will need to have the correct verb, use the correct article and preposition. You will also need to consider whether a noun is singular or plural, so whether you should put an S on the end to signify more than one, as well as all the other grammatical information hidden in the words and sentences. Recap. So, that's the E2 OET writing method. Remember on test day to interpret the case notes correctly, select relevant case notes based on the task and reader, organize the case notes into logical paragraphs, and transform the case notes into proper grammatical sentences. If you follow these steps, you'll be well on your way to a good OET grade. Thanks.